we were talking about karaoke, and I gotta say, go Grease Lightning. You're burning up the quarter mile. Grease Lightning, go Grease Lightning. She knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Awesome. Um, but we're not here to do karaoke. Maybe one day we'll do some karaoke theme podcasts. However, we are talking something that I think is plaguing a lot of people, especially going through the pandemic, the emotional tolls and so on and so forth, but really is what we do to, I guess, overcome obstacles, barriers, what happens when we, I guess, go through struggles, we turn to alternative methods to go through life and to just have a good day or a happy moment in our life. But once again, this is not my experience at all. Mandy, talk about what happened and what got you into your addiction in your life.
Um, well, it actually starts back to when I was like 12 years old. It was the first time I started experimenting with drugs. It was marijuana, is the first drug that I dabbled in. But then by 14, 15, I was already adding like acid and mushrooms to the mix, plus alcohol. By 16, MDMA, ecstasy with continuing of the drinking. And then by 19, was the first time I tried cocaine, and that stuck with me for 16 years. And I'm now 3.5 years clean from that. So yes, it's crazy because basically my whole life I have been using some sort of substance, right? Like 12 years old, like that's wild for me to think. Like I have a niece
Yeah.
who's 12, and to think like that she would be going down that path, like, like is just like, she's still a child. She's just a little girl to me, right? So yeah, and I mean, in the moments when I remember back being those ages, I really believed that I was just experimenting, like just curious, which I'm sure was part of it. But now being, healed, and these 3.5 years of living life this way, and just learning more about myself and looking at my childhood traumas and how I grew up, and that I could say that it was like more likely that I was looking for some sort of escape from my reality of, just what I was experiencing. Like my father was an alcoholic, and he was in and out of our lives. So, my mom did divorce him when we were young, but those ages from 0 to 7, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but our brains are a sponge. We literally just absorb everything, right? So whatever had happened in those younger years that I might not even have like an actual physical memory, my subconscious has that in there, like and so just, moving along into the older years and still having my father in my life, but being an alcoholic, like still it's doing damage. And so, when we have these traumas, we often, unless we have healthy habits or have people to show us another way, which my mom was amazing, but I don't even think she realized how deep I was going. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I did the drugs in front of my parents, right? Like, like we would go to whoever's house the parents weren't at, like, and as a teenager, that seemed like the most fun thing that we could do is just like get messed up, right? But yeah, so finally I had decided I had had enough, right? Like the way my life was, like internally, I was really not happy, right? Like my mind, I was messing up my mind a lot, which was then, bringing out bad relationships or bringing bad relationships to me. I had very unhealthy like relationships with men. There was some of the girlfriend relationships were also unhealthy. Just I had no boundaries really, right? Because I just didn't have this self-worth for myself while being in that lifestyle. So now moving forward, I've done so much work, and I literally don't feel like the same person that I was before.
That's really good. That's a lot to take in, and I love it because it gives the listeners, viewers, time to reflect, and at the same time, a lot of people can relate to that. So if you don't mind me asking, you mentioned that you started marijuana at the age of 12. Um, and then you also mentioned about your childhood trauma and so on and so forth, and how they interlink with each other's. Do you have any siblings that were going through the same thing, or were able to talk to them, say, hey, this is what's going on, or are you the only child?
No, I have many siblings, but there's three of us that are from the same parents. So we did have each other through these experiences. And I mean, I can see, like, my brother is now an alcoholic, and he still struggles with it, and he can now see that I've overcome my lifestyle, which hopefully gives him hope that he can also make the changes for himself, right? Um, but we all, like, I have an older sister too. She through her own life shit when it came to like drugs and alcohol. She's now also doing way better. Like, she's has a family, and she's going to go back to school and like further educate herself to like in that kind of sense and stuff. But we all definitely took our traumas and didn't had that effect. Our traumas had the effect on us that led us down these paths of destruction, if you will, right? So
Yeah. So going through all that though, were you guys have a close bond when you guys were growing up? And if so,
yeah,
sorry,
sorry.
if so, was there like portions in which when you're going through traumas, was it a group trauma in which you guys were able to lean on each other and have your own space together to have some sort of support to get through those days of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely were close growing up, and we did, have our moments, obviously, as siblings. But I don't even think, like, when I think back, like in those moments that I remember, like hard moments, like we were so young, and it was normalized for us, like this, like, so we didn't even at the time, I think, realize we were going through a trauma. We were just like, okay, dad's drunk and angry again, like, let's just stay away. Or like, I remember sometimes I would have to step in and tell him, like, this is when I was a little bit older, like not a child, but step in and tell him to like stop screaming at my brother. And like, if he was going to hit someone, it'd be me, not my little brother, right? Stuff like that. Like, he never did, like, we got spanked when we were younger, but we never were physically abused by him. Like, he'd threaten. But yeah, so I, like, in those moments, like, I remember thinking it was just how it was, right? Like, this is just how it was. And it wasn't until later that, I really realized like how much that was, like, I knew it wasn't okay, but, I didn't in those moments really think of it as I was going through a trauma, right? Like, it wasn't until later, but we definitely we still did lean on each other in the sense of like protecting each other from it, or like we would talk about it, but not in a way of like healthy healing. We were just
Yeah.
like, like, it wasn't until later years that I really started looking at what that did to us and me, right? So
Mhm.
it's when you're in it, it's and you're weren't taught or don't have those healthy coping mechanisms. You just really, for me, we just thought, well, this is just life, this is just normal, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. That makes fully sense. Um, with that being said as well, you mentioned that you started with marijuana, you went to different drugs. It seems like you got harder into drugs further down the road. What led you down that road? Is it because the trauma was getting worse, or it was just like, you know what, just because I tried one, let me just try the others in a sense and e- experiment?
yeah, basically it was just, let's just keep trying, it was like, I was just looking for how does this make me feel? How does this make me feel? And as I had mentioned before, like in the moment, I definitely was like, oh, I'm just experimenting, but there clearly was something I was searching for feeling wise, right? Like, because I tried like so many different things. And then like cocaine became my drug of choice because it gives you this like great rush of like dopamine, right? And like you're like just on this different level. But then even with that drug, like it stops having the same effect, right? And then they call it chasing the dragon, where just you keep doing more and more and more trying to get that initial like high that you get, right? So, and that's where I guess then it's like the addiction comes from, right? Like, because you do it and then you dip, your body actually stops producing like serotonin and dopamine because it's getting it from the drugs, right? So then you're craving it so that you can get that high again. But then you get like it's just an ongoing cycle of like that.
Exactly. It's for us, we call it chasing the high. It's you have your first high when you first try the drug, you're like, wow, this is fantastic. And then when you try it again, your body gets used to the same amount. So you just chase it, chase it, chase it. The issue with that now becomes in you're heading towards being OD, for example, and
Yeah.
going for that chase in a sense. Um, you mentioned like, did you have any of those experiences where you're close to being OD or friends around you? And was that somewhat of a wake up call in a little
Yeah.
aspect of things, or were you just like, no, it's okay, my body, I need this just to survive?
Yeah, it's there were times where like sometimes I had been up for like a couple days, right? And still it was wild to me because I would still go to work like,
Mhm.
like and I would reach points where I did feel like kind of paranoid or just like super sketchy and stuff like that. But I never thought I would OD all like, which is wild because I did have friends around me that did. So it's like, and I would talk about it with my other friends that would like, these were mutual friends of ours that would like pass away. And we would say, oh, wow, like it's wild. Like that could never happen to us. But then there's that little voice inside your head that says like, yeah, yeah, it could, but never did I really believe it because otherwise I think I would have stopped sooner. But it could have been, right? Like, and yeah, I saw friends go, and it's still it's weird that it didn't scare me enough. Like that's how addicted I was, right? Like it was like, yeah, no, I just want to keep doing this because I'll be fine because I like the way it makes me feel and whatever, right? Like everyone said, like you often hear people say, "Oh, it'll never happen to me," right? Well, I never thought I'd get addicted to cocaine. I actually remember saying to myself, "I'm never even going to try it." Like I didn't want to, and then I did, and like I loved it, which was not a good thing, but that was like. Then I remember telling myself, "Oh, whenever I'm ready, I'll be able to stop." And that was not the case, right? Like 16 years, that's a long time,
It
right?
is,
Like,
yeah. From that, did you, again, I kind of know I guess the lifestyle of being a user through friends experience and such. But is there any effects on your body itself through all the uses of drugs that you've had before that's affecting you now? Because it still stays in your system for quite some time, I assume.
yeah, it's out of my system now for sure. It's been 3.5 years. It's not that long that it stays in your system. And like, I actually did do a lot of research around what I had done to myself and how long it would take to reverse it or if I could. So one thing I was mainly concerned about was my brain, right? Like, because it's literally putting like holes in your brain when you're doing
Yeah.
it. But over time, your brain can heal. So I was like, okay, cool, that's good. And I did things to expand my mind as I was healing, right? Like I learned about the brain, like I said, I learned about the addiction. I learned about rewiring my brain because I had obviously been one way for so long. So I literally, my your brain's like a computer. So now I think I'm this way. So I had taken this like course or sessions called Rewired by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And I dove into that. I dove into gratitude practices. Like I was determined to literally change my mind and become the person that I wanted to be. So those were two big things that I started doing right when I was like, Kate, enough is enough, right? Like I need to change who I am. And the way to do that is literally to change who I am through my mind. So those are very, very, very helpful tools, right? Like
It's really good. You mentioned, and this is a key word, self-worth. What made you realize that you're worth more, that you want to change your life in?
it was a series of things. Like I guess I just, realized like what kind of life I actually wanted to live and like what kind of relationship I actually wanted, how I wanted to feel in this world. And during my first few months of like deciding I'm going to stop, I actually met someone who, like, we had been friends for a couple of years and then things like kind of shifted. And like he knew I was on the sober journey. He never partied, so it like wasn't like an issue there. And the way he like loved me like also gave me this newfound worth within myself, because he was patient, he was understanding, like like he knew that I had to heal, and instead of getting frustrated or mad or like gaslighting me when I was like going through like really tough moments, and like he just supported me and he was there and he understood, right? Because there were some times where, like, I mean, for lack of a better word, I'd kind of like have a freak out because my everything is feels different and weird and I'm confused, and my emotions were all over the place because I'm not getting this thing that I had been getting, and I'm trying to learn who I am again. And it was, a very wild ride, like in that first year. And there this he really helped me also see my worth, like knowing, like love is very powerful, right? So me and him aren't together anymore. He served his purpose in my life, which was to get me through this like hard big lump. But I had never had love like that from a man. Like like my father was very verbally abusive to me, and then that just sent some spirals into the relationships that I had and what I thought men were, how like subconsciously how I believed or was programmed that men were supposed to be like in your life, like how they were supposed to treat you, right? So yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. That's I thought about a topic I want to talk to you about after you sparked an interest. You keep mentioning the person that you want to be, and I think you mentioned about 4 times now. Who is that person? Who is Mandy? And who does
Well,
Mandy?
yeah, like I definitely feel like the person that I was meant to be, or I guess a better way of phrasing would be who I always was, right? Like, and it's just, chill and like confident, and like, some of these things were there before, but they're obviously hidden, or they were there before, but they were hidden. And then like, your mind starts to play tricks on you. But even just the way I can present myself into the world and the universe, where I really can give back and I can really, like just feel like flowy and calm and trusting and like not so out of control and wacky. And even I never used to be able to spend time alone. Like I just always needed people around, and I wanted to have people around. I wanted to be doing things, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, I really enjoy my time by myself, right? So even just like loving myself enough that I want to be with just me, right? So that person, right? So yeah, and just being able to really give back to the universe and to be able to feel good about my choices and be a good example for, you know, my niece, my nephew, my kids that I want to have. Like, you know, like I don't want to be the same parent that my dad was, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting. I could see that and not to discredit anything that you've been doing as of late, you're on a journey, and it's kind of cool. It is kind of cool to see
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Thank you.
With two things, I got two more questions that just came to mind. One, you keep mentioning your dad. I remember you mentioned something about your mom earlier. Have you spoken to your mom or spoken to your dad, if they're around, about your childhood and saying, hey, guess what? You shouldn't have done that, or these are the effect of what you've done to me, and like really
Yeah.
confront.
So, well, my dad doesn't care. Like, he's still an alcoholic. He's still, you know, miserable. And I have given my dad so many chances to come back into my life. Like I've cut him off a lot. And he just, like, I empathize for him because clearly he has his own traumas. Clearly he has his own shit that he never dealt with. But the way he treats me is not okay. And I just, like he knows on a soul level like what he has done, but there's no sense in having a conversation because he won't receive it mentally, you know. My mom definitely knows. I'm very honest with my mom, and so I've had many of my like meltdowns and freakouts about childhood shit and just like I didn't talk to her about my addiction when I was in it. And then I think I waited probably a year and a half to tell her like, this is what I've done. Like I wanted to be out of it before I told her about it. I wanted to, you know, so, I mean, I'm sure she knew that something was up, but like no one in my family ever mentioned anything to me if they did know. Right. So, but yes, I have definitely had talks with my mom about the effects of everything. And, you know, she also she did the best she could. My dad fucked off and she had 3 young children. And, you know, like we still saw my dad sometimes, but she kept it very limited. He kept it very limited, but, you know, he was still our dad and we wanted to see him and all that kind of stuff. Right. And yeah, so she knows about everything that I have gone through and what I've healed and what I'm healing and stuff like that. So
Makes sense. Yeah, that's good. Again, it's good to have at least one parent around to talk to have that support, to really just give you that love that you want, or sorry, not want, but really need, especially from a
right.
parent figure compared to like a friend or a lover, for example. Last question I have for you is really, oh, I got 2 more questions. I got many questions. It really is, if you could look back on, or if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say to her?
Oh boy. I've actually have had talks with my younger self. These were some of my healing tools that I learned along the way, going into like a meditation and talking to my younger self. But I mean, just telling her that she was safe and she is loved, even if it's not from my dad. Like my dad still loves me, but he just doesn't know how to show love because of how he was shown love, right? And you know, just that everything will be okay. Like for whatever reason, this was my soul journey, and you know, I do believe that I like I did make those choices, but I went through it, but now I have this mess that becomes my message, right? Like, so yeah. But I just want my little girl self just to know that she is loved, even though her father doesn't know how to show it great, you know.
You just mentioned your message. So what is your message today?
My message is that like people literally can create whatever life they desire. And no matter how long you have been one way, if you are not happy, if you do not like anything, if it's your job, like your relationship, your addiction, anything, that we are so powerful, and like we can literally create whatever life we desire. It all just starts with like believing in ourselves and making those small steps. Like I didn't just get from there to here overnight. Like it's been 3.5 years where I have been unpacking my shit and creating my life and asking myself, like, what actually do I want? Right. And I live a completely different life than I did before. Like I created a work from anywhere career for myself. So now I can travel and go wherever I want, right? Like I have a whole new set of friends, like not only because I'm traveling, but even back home, like, and everything about my life is different. Like how I feel, like how I present myself, how I live, like how I think, like and we can have whatever life we want. And I don't think we're meant be here to suffer. Like obviously we need to go through our challenges and stuff, but I do believe that we're supposed to be happy majority of the time and be able to create our lives the way we want it. And people just have to believe in themselves. And I just want them to know that anything is possible.
That's awesome. I like that. I do like that. I'm going to end it on that note because there's nothing more to that.
Yeah.
Mandy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.